Eyes. Eyes everywhere, watching, staring, piercing through him. Dark, multitudinous. He couldn't escape them. "Everything is mine to take," a voice whispered. Darkness engulfed him. It wrapped round him like a cloak, heavy, weighing him down. Ichigo gasped, the sound catching in his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't move. Sinking slowly down, down, down. "You will never escape me, Kurosaki Ichigo." Where was Zenjutsu? Where was his sword, his spirit? Ichigo felt panic drown him, seeping, sinking into his bones. The darkness followed, embracing him tightly, like he thought a lover might do. Pressure around his head, his chest, crushing him. He gasped for breath. The clock ticked. The shadows lengthened. The clouds moved against the sun, strung up like a burning jewel in the sky. Ichigo stared, reading, then reading again. His hands clenched and the paper crumpled. He blinked to clear his eyes, but nothing changed. "We regret to inform you. Insufficient grades. Your application was unsuccessful." He forced his breath to come in deep and slow, while his mind worked in overdrive. His thoughts like tsunami waves, drowning him. Of course, the lack of sleep, the missed classes, homework handed in late, deadlines regarded through a blur rather than his usual razor-sharp focus. Tuts and headshakes, comments from his teachers, who had never really believed in him anyway. "You showed some promise there, Kurosaki," Ochai-sensei had sighed, not long before the end of the school year. "Such a shame, what happened?" "Well, no surprise there. I guess once a delinquent, always a delinquent, huh?" He'd caught the mumbled remark, not by a fellow student, but passing between teachers. Ichigo had glared at them fiercely and saw them both flinch, and that ever-present feral itch under his skin, which had lived in him since Ihuach's defeat, snapped his nerves into a frenzy he could barely contain. Ichigo's hands fisted at the memory. Crumpled paper became torn. He'd cultivated the permanent scowl, the standoffish attitude, and then he'd studied and aced his exams to rub it all in their faces, playing their little game. It had worked until Rukia had slipped through his bedroom wall and shown him the secret of life after death. Then the scales had tipped and other things took priority. School had taken a backseat to saving his friends, and then the world twice. But now, this. Your application was unsuccessful. A complicated game to play, pretending not to care what people thought of him, all the while feeling sliced to the core by the smug satisfaction whispered under the breath of the teachers, the other students who had always underestimated him. In the end, he'd done it to himself, the only loser in a one-player game. Pathetic. Unsuccessful. In other words, failure. He'd cut down Aizen, with delusions of godhood. He'd sliced Ihuach in two, a being who had actually ascended closer to attaining it than any other. And here he was, closed in by his room, trembling, defeated by high school grades and medical school entrance exam results. The clock ticked. The shadows lengthened. The clouds moved against the moon and the stars, strung up like jewels in the sky. Eyes everywhere, smothering him. They filled his view. Everywhere he looked, they looked back, each eye filled with multiple irises, wells of ink that threatened to spill over and drown him in their darkness. Ichigo was falling, and he couldn't stop. He reached behind him, desperate for the familiar feel of Zangetsu's hilt in his hand, but his fingers closed on cold, empty air. "I have the power to change the future and the past," Ihuach spoke softly to him, tenderly, like a parent to a child. The darkness in his eyes spread and spilled over, dripping towards Ichigo. "What makes you think you are still alive?" He choked. "No, I am. The ink rose in a tidal wave, reaching dizzying heights. His heart beat a fierce tattoo against his ribcage, muscles jerking, nerves twitching, but he couldn't stop falling. He couldn't stop the dark crashing into him and around him. It buried him alive. Yes, he was alive. He was still alive, damn it. Ichigo felt the taste of rust, metal, blood fill his mouth, and he woke, shaking, sheets twisted around his legs and soaked with sweat. He was panting. He checked his clock, bright neon numbers flashing in dim light that filtered through his curtains. 3:34 am. Sighing in frustration, he sagged back against the bed. Yet another night lost to twisted dreams, voices and visions that had carefully encoded themselves in his psyche, as deep and integral to him as his DNA. How many days, weeks, months had it been? Yet he still felt as though he was walking a knife's edge, constantly alert to the presence of spirits and hollows to the point of exhaustion, at the cost of everything else. Relaxing, sleeping peacefully, enjoying the company of his friends and family seemed like luxuries from a lifetime ago. Could he now turn back time and undo this for him? Guilt immediately flooded him at the thought. No, this was no one's fault but his own. He could do this. He could overcome this. He'd faced death, despair, so many times. This was nothing. The light from his clock was too bright. The hum of the air conditioner was too loud. He tossed and turned, but Ichigo knew the night was lost. He was too on edge to even think about sleeping and decided to patrol. The moment he pressed his badge to his chest and his human body slid to the floor, he felt lighter. The air tasted fresher. He arranged his human body in his bed and stepped out the window without looking back, taking a moment outside to breathe the sharp, chill air deeply into his lungs. It shocked him into full wakefulness. The breeze ruffled his hair, and he heard nothing but the sound of muted, distant traffic. The weight, the shape, the energy of Zangetsu pressed against his back was reassuring. In this form, at least, he was never alone. The vastness of Hyukomundo was laid bare to him. He shot through the air, occasionally landing on outcroppings of rock, and if he spotted a particularly tall and strong-looking tree out of the corner of his eye, he always took care to smash it to pieces. He didn't touch the sand. He didn't need to. The speed and power of Resurrection pulsed through clawed black hands and feet. He found purchase in the air itself, and could travel huge distances with little effort. Even without the transformation, whether partial or full, Grimmjow found himself always pushing, straining against the forces of nature. If he were to move at his current speed without his Hyro, the skin would have been stripped from his body. He stopped, crouching at the edge of a tall sand dune. There were few landmarks in the desert, the moon the only constant to guide him through the endless sand. Tonight its crescent shone brilliantly, bathing everything in a soft white glow. Infinite shades of gray rolled away in the distance, until on the horizon the outline of an isolated rocky cliff face was brought into sharp relief. He saw the outline of a cave, narrow and pointed, deep in shadow and secretive against the light of the moon. Grimmjow stilled, listening carefully. He could feel the reverberations of a low hum, echoing from within. To an untrained eye, this area would have looked much the same to any other, but his sensitive vision perceived minute shifts in temperature, pressure, and spiritual activity with ease. He saw trails of those who had passed before, the holes where lizards had emerged. He smelled the scent of blood in the air. Others hollows, many others, had been here before him, lured in by this thing. A single Gran Ray Zero, and it would be all over. But you will touch nothing and no one, Grimmjow Jaegerjaquez, Harable had warned. Our ecosystem hangs precariously, unbalanced and delicate. Our population needs to recover. Go and investigate this phenomenon. Whatever it is, we've been losing too many of our own, and it needs to be stopped. Just keep your hands to yourself. Technically he had. He'd kicked all those trees down, sometimes savoring the blunt impact against his feet as trunks crumbled, sometimes delighting in slicing through branches with razor-edge claws. He thought of her warning, and Grimmjow felt his mouth widen into a savage grin. Fuck anyone who thought they could give him orders. So he'd torn down a few trees and blasted a few rocks. So what? She owed him and Neliel big time for rescuing her from the Quincy's anyway. Though he would allow that Ter Harable was a damn sight better than Aizen at ruling, he'd never believed she'd be able to return Hyukomundo to a state before the Shinigami or Quincy invasions. He knew for a fact she and her irritating loudmouthed flunkies enjoyed regular luxurious baths, while Neliel took advantage of the electricity supply Aizen had provided to cook regular meals. For fun, so a return to a life without luxuries, and he considered them luxuries, remembering nothing but an eternity hiding in cold dark caves and bathing in coarse sand before Aizen's arrival had always been off the table. But there were upsides. Grimmjow fished a small metallic device from a pocket and held it up to his eye. The chimera, or whatever it was called, had changed everything. Water and electricity were useful, but this image recording machine, specially modified to work in Hugo-Mundo's low-light environment, apparently had been attached to his hand like a sixth finger since Urahara Kisuke had shown him how to use it. At first, the numerous buttons and screens overwhelmed him, and he'd had to fight the urge to crush it in his hands. But after mastering the basics, an obsession was sparked, and now he took it with him on every reconnaissance mission he could. Harable complained that he took too many pictures of sand. Grimmjow retorted that 99% of Hugo-Mundo was sand, and his endless fucking surveillance meant she and Neliel could stay at Los Noches and still know what was going on in the forests and the colonies without hauling their asses over half the desert. Wasn't that the point of being queen? It didn't matter. They were stuck in that castle, holding meetings, writing reports, realigning boundaries, but he was here, outside that oppressive domed roof and its fake blue sky. He was free to roam, to track, to investigate. Now he had this new device with him, and the farthest edges of the world he discovered could finally be shared with others. Once on the way back from a mission, he'd been caught by the sight of a tree, slender and lopsided, backlit by the moon. It stood alone and defiant, jagged branches piercing the velvet black sky, while a skinny trunk rose from a gentle curve of sand. He'd stopped and stared for a while, before grabbing the machine and taking a picture. It hadn't been the strangest sight he'd seen in the desert. No, not strange at all. So why had he done it? Looking through the device now, Grimmjow pushed the thought out of his mind and snapped several shots of the jutting rocks that formed the mouth of the cave and its surroundings. It looked harmless enough, but even from this distance, the low hum he heard set off an insistent tug in his gut, a sensation of being pulled towards something. It felt almost like some sort of refined hollow bait, mixed with the spiritual energy of something else familiar. He didn't bother getting too close. He'd read the reports or skimmed them, whatever, and seen how the weaker Gillians had been ripped to shreds the moment they approached the entrance of the cave. There had been no evidence of a predator or a planned attack either. The creatures just seemed to dissolve. Blue eyes narrowed through the viewfinder, and he took dozens of images from several different angles, approaching as close as he dared. After circling the site several times, thoroughly investigating the scent trail of any being that led to those rocks, he pressed a button on the machine's side and recorded his findings, speaking in a low voice. Found the lure, about 20 Gran Ray Zeros worth of distance over from Los Noches. Smelled a bunch of trails leading here, but they all stop before the entrance of a cave. Nothing else here, just a pile of rocks. Weird Ryatsu. He paused, considering. Doesn't seem to be doing a fucking thing anyway, so who gives a shit? Personally, I don't care if a couple dozen Jillians stumble out the forest and get caught in a trap. That's what you get for being fucking stupid. Grimmjow out. Light glowed dimly from candles placed in the small stone lanterns lining either side of his path. Set in rock from the ground until they rose above his head, they illuminated gently floating mist and the red wooden gates that stretched ahead of him. Moss underfoot was soft, lush and green. It was gentle, pleasant. Ichigo should have felt soothed as he climbed down steps covered in cushiony, giving vegetation. But there was no sound, no chirp of birds or drip of rain. Nothing but silence, penetrating, watchful. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He was looking for something. Someone. But who? There was no sword at his back or in his hand. Panic throbbed in his chest. His fingers twitched. Where was Zenjutsu? On and on he descended. There was no level path, nothing going uphill. He just kept walking deeper, deeper, into the silent mist that was beginning to cloud thickly around him. It was ice cold and wrapped around him in an unpleasant embrace. How long had he been walking for? Finger-like wisps entwined themselves, wraith-like, under his jaw, around his throat. Frightened, he reached behind him automatically, but his hand closed on thin air. As if in response, a heavy force pressed down on him, and Ichigo found himself struggling for breath. But he kept going. And going. And going. A desperate urge pulled him forward. Nothing ever changed. Always stone lanterns, wooden gates, stairs leading down, shrouded in perpetual twilight. I have to find. Numb, he slipped on the slick moss and landed hard on his tailbone, pain shooting up his spine. Ichigo froze, shocked at first, then a strange vibration resonated inside him, and he started to pant, palms sweating. Someone was supposed to be there, someone was supposed to have. His harsh, ragged breath sounded deafening in the silence. He was shaking. No, no sitting. Get up. Move. 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 You have to. The mist curdled into fog, and the weight from earlier multiplied tenfold. The light from the candles was diffused and otherworldly. Then, starting from a distance, he saw that slowly, one by one, the lamps flickered out, until there was nothing. The night was thick and black as tar, surrounding him with its solid presence. It was so hard to breathe. He couldn't get up. He couldn't see. No, he thought, frantic. No, I have to see. I can't see, I have to find, I have to save. Ichigo reached out in front of him. No, he couldn't even see his hands. Wake up. A heavy hand landed on his shoulder in a bruising grip, and he opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Fingers dug into his flesh. The touch was a burning brand, skin scorched, melting down to the bone. My son, born in darkness. Wake up. Ichigo couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't make a sound. You will stay here with me, in the shadows. Iwatch breathed into his ear. Fingers moved from Ichigo's shoulders to around his neck, squeezing, crushing. Until the end of time. Usually, he was awake and lying sluggishly in bed long before Yusu knocked at his bedroom door and called him down for breakfast. This morning was no different, except this time he was woken by what felt like two angry cotton balls biffing his face repeatedly. Ichigo, you restless idiot. Let go of me, beast, Khan shrieked, beady eyes glinting, hurling punch after squishy punch. You almost ripped my tail off again. How dare you? Don't take your issues out on my precious, delicate, sexy body. Unlike you, I actually plan to use ga. Ichigo grabbed the stuffed toy and brought it close to his face as he sat up. His thunderous, sleep-deprived expression was enough to instantly deflate the mod soul, and his plush lion body went limp. Ichigo, he whined plaintively, paws coming together. Come on now, buddy, pal, friend, amigo, this is getting too much. I know you haven't been getting any tail. Well, as far as I know, you've never gotten any, and sure, maybe you can't do much better than mine, but... Con. I was just about to give you some heartfelt advice, you fool. I don't need advice from some twisted pervert who likes to jump at women in the dark from 50 feet away, using someone else's body. Do you know what you've done to my reputation in this town? Ichigo hissed. Twisted pervert? Khan gasped, bringing a paw to his chest and looking as wounded as a toy animal could. Jump at women? In the dark? From 50 feet? In someone else's body? Only a couple of these things are true. The rest are lies. Who's been feeding you these untruths? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the police that come round looking for an orange-haired deviant that stalks women at night. Ichigo squeezed Khan's soft, round head between his two hands. Stumpy toy limbs squirmed furiously. Ichigo brought him closer and growled. If I end up with a criminal record and never get a normal job in my life because of you, I swear I'll find a way to shove you up Kenpachi's asshole and leave you in there for the rest of your existence. Ichigo, no. Think of the sweat, the hair, the Iskrak funk. I'm not designed to withstand an environment like that. How about Kiritsuchi then? You know, there might already be a bunch of weird stuff up in there to keep you company. Khan sobbed in horror. We're allies, friends, family. I've only ever wanted the best for you and nothing less. Who else has been looking out for you this whole time but me?" He threw himself forward and plastered himself over Ichigo's face, wailing. Ichigo peeled him off, threw him into a desk drawer and locked it, ignoring the sounds of a muffled emotional breakdown from within. He scrubbed his face and hair roughly with his hands before drawing up his knees and resting his chin on them, sighing. The night before had brought no hollows or other wandering spirits in need of ushering into the next world, so he spent the earlier part of dawn sitting on top of the tallest bridge crossing the river, watching the sun peek over the horizon, its light struggling to break past layers of cloud. It promised to be a downcast day, matching his mood. Ichigo had tried again to sleep when he had slipped back into his bedroom and into his living body. But these days all slumber led down eerie darkened paths, paved in memories with jagged edges that tore into him and left him bleeding, mentally and emotionally, in ways he hadn't known were possible. He reached up to trail his fingers gently over his neck, still feeling that ghostly touch. "Niai-chan, are you up?" A quiet knock at the door. He rose in a hurry and crammed the torn remnants of his letter back into its envelope before unlocking the drawer containing Kon and shoving it inside. There was a brief scream before he slammed it closed and locked it again. "Ah, yeah, Yuzu, come on in." His door opened and his little sister poked her head into his room, eyes shining. "Well, what did it say?" Ichigo had a millisecond before plastering a bright smile on his face and moving to ruffle her blonde hair, ignoring her protests. "It's, fine. Great." The shine faded from her eyes. "Oh, really?" "Sure." He avoided her gaze, stealing a glance outside. A sky smothered in gloomy, gray clouds greeted him. "I'm gonna go grab a couple things. You need anything? We need toilet paper, right?" "We don't need anything. I went shopping yesterday," she protested as he pulled on a jacket, grabbing his wallet and keys. "Are you having breakfast? I made eggs the way you like them." Ushering her out of his room, Ichigo held back a sigh as he saw Karin standing legs akimbo, arms crossed, blocking his way. Dark eyes narrowed at him. "Hey, I'm heading out. Need anything?" he asked. His hand was smacked away when he attempted to pat his other sister on the head, and he scowled at her when she stuck her tongue out at him. "Nope, and don't touch me. You look like Oscar the fucking Grouch. Take a shower sometime." "I shower every day," Ichigo snapped at her, all three traipsing downstairs. "And don't swear," a pause. "And who the hell is Oscar?" "Who's Oscar the Grouch?" "God ikai niai, you're so uncultured," she sniffed. "Plus you swear all the time." "Not in front of you." "Oh wow, so you're just fake and two-faced then. Good for you," Karin drawled, sitting at the table. Ichigo resisted the urge to grab her by the ankles and hang her upside down. For one thing, she was too tall for that now, and the thought brought a pang of nostalgia. "Anyway, who cares if you shower? You still look like a tramp. Have you even changed out of your pajamas?" He looked down. He hadn't. Karin stuck her tongue out at him again, triumphant, while he shot her an exasperated look before heading back upstairs to get dressed. Yuzu sighed and started serving the eggs. It had started to rain by the time he was ready to leave again. He grabbed a mouthful of breakfast quickly, hoping, praying. Alas. "Good morning, Ichigo Urk." Ichigo blocked and deflected his father's flying roundhouse kick with ease, throwing the other man over the couch. Isshin lay crumpled in a heap, then crawled, sobbing, to a giant photograph hung on the wall. "Masaki, the strength passed down through manly lineage is shining strong in our beloved firstborn," he wailed, plastering himself to the image of his children's deceased mother. "You would be so proud to see him." "I'm heading out," Ichigo yelled, almost running to the front door to pull his shoes on. Too loud. Too much. He had to escape, somewhere, somehow. Outside the rain was soft and light, much like mist. The thought stopped him dead. Unease stirred in the pit of his stomach. After a second of hesitation he plowed ahead. pulling his hoodie up over headphones, face downcast. Just a quick stop to a convenience store. He'd pick up some snacks, then he'd study. He'd retake those exams and he would pass, and he'd be back on the right track again. Ichigo had looked Ifwatch in the eyes, and torn through him with a blade sharp enough to cut the moon. How could high school defeat him? He just needed some time away from that house, from possessed children's toys and sassy, inquisitive but well-meaning sisters and overbearing, secretive fathers. The drizzle wasn't heavy, but Ichigo soon found the material of his hood damp enough to irritate him. His shoes and socks were wet. Water gathered in puddles, shivering with tiny raindrops. Everything around him, the sky, the ground, the concrete walls of houses, the streets he meandered through, was gray and lifeless. He ditched the idea of a convenience store and grabbed a can of hot coffee from a nearby vending machine, deciding that if nothing was needed at home, he'd just take a walk in this miserable weather. Even in wet socks, the most disgusting feeling in the world, it would be better than stewing at home, fending off questions and sarcastic remarks. Just 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other, just keep going. Just keep walking. Ichigo walked in time to the beat of the music thumping in his ears, feeling it travel down his shoulders, pumping into his legs. He felt restless and exhausted at the same time. But this was good. Mindless was good. Sometimes it was better to let his body take over, to stop the thoughts slamming through his mind like runaway trains. I just need to keep going, he thought. Towards what? The traitorous whisper, from the deepest recesses of his mind, stopped Ichigo in his tracks. No, don't think. Just go. Go. Go somewhere. A stiff wind picked up. Ichigo felt like it was spurring him on. The rain lashed down harder and cold water seeped under his clothes, dripping down his neck and shoulders, but he kept walking. One footstep after another. He didn't feel like going downhill. His muscle memory took over, and soon enough he was striding up towards the cemetery, driven by a sudden urge, taking stairs 2 at a time, almost at a run before he arrived at his mother's grave. He stood there, not knowing what to say. He sat heavily on the ground. Time passed. Music played through his headphones. He drank his now lukewarm can of coffee. Trees swayed in a wind that was softening into a breeze, and slowly the rain began to clear. The light changed. Ichigo looked towards the sky and watched the clouds, gray swirling into lavender, lined with gold, moving ponderously across the sky. He saw the sun come out, a brief flash of blinding light and bright blue sky. After living in grayscale, the color was radiant, vibrant, alive. The sight breathed new life into him. Ichigo smiled. The motion felt unfamiliar, like he hadn't done it in years. It was on his way back home that Onaja Ikumi accosted him. Skidding her van to a sudden stop in front of the clinic, she threw open the door and had him in a headlock before he could even begin screaming about dangerous idiots driving on public roads. Where have you been, idiot? Do you know how many jobs are piling up while you slack off? She ground a fist against his head. I've been calling and messaging for weeks, and you haven't answered me once. How is this any way to treat a beloved boss/big sister figure? I've been studying. I told you that, Ichigo choked out, extricating himself from her with difficulty, pulling off his hood and making sure she hadn't damaged his headphones in her rampage. I had exams to take, a future to think of, normal human stuff. He cut himself off, scratching at his head, hoping she would leave soon. His hair was damp and too long, and he was sure it looked a mess. He knew there were dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't showered yet, and the walk in the rain had him feeling dirty and sticky. He wanted to go inside, bathe, eat chocolate, and sleep, in that exact order. Ikumi raised an eyebrow at him, gave him a once-over. Something in her expression changed. She didn't ask about applications, about success, and Ichigo was grateful for that. Listen, she said suddenly, and sounded serious. I've been expanding my network, trying to get more clients outside of Karakura. I came across a job I thought might be good for you. It's a little far away, but well paid. Very well paid. Irritation faded into curiosity. What kind of job? As a care worker for... Nope. Let me finish, she cut over him, raising a hand. It's a sweet deal. You work 20 hours a week max. You get to live in a huge apartment in the middle of Tokyo with cheap subsidized rent. Plus you get to visit a palace every day. A palace? Ichigo raised an eyebrow. She had blatantly lied to him before to get him to accept a job. How much of this was even true? She might not be truly named after an eel, but she was as slippery as one when it came to getting Ichigo to do the stupidest work. That's right. So it seems the client in question has links to the royal family, of all things. Not too sure of the details, but I thought I'd pass it on. No thanks, he said firmly, turning and heading to the house. He raised a hand to her in goodbye without looking back. I've had enough of royalty for a lifetime. Well, 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 look what the cat dragged in. Grimmjow threw a bala at Mila Rose without looking. Real original, you tired hag. Never heard that one before. He heard her squawking and would have continued calmly on his way if she hadn't aimed a fully formed zero at his head. He stopped, dodging easily and placing one hand on Pantera's hilt before turning to look at her. There was smoke coming from her hair, and if he looked close enough, steam coming out of her ears. He smiled, full of teeth. What? Wanna go? You stupid delinquent asshole, she seethed, crouching low and reaching for her own sword. Using big words today, huh? Congrats, looks like you finally grew another brain cell to keep the first one company. Fuck you. What's with all this ugly screaming, now? Someone quietly sing-songed from behind him. Another shrill, unpleasant voice joined in. Yeah, what the fuck is going on here? Grimmjow closed his eyes, deeply disgusted. Not all of them at the same time. One or two he could deal with without resorting to his full resurrection, but this was too much. His hand tightened around Pantera. Oi, Grimmjow, Apache's nasal voice pierced him like a sliver of ice. What the hell did you do to Mila Rose? Nothing she didn't deserve, he snapped, glaring at the three women fiercely as they gathered together as a phalanx, advancing on him with thunderous expressions. In the case of Mila Rose and Apache, or cold, judgmental eyes, Sung Sun's mouth was hidden as usual behind her long sleeve-covered hand. They started to glow. Grimmjow drew his sword. The steel rang softly, as if Pantera hungered for a brawl as much as he did. That's enough, all of you. Haribel's soft, low voice froze them. Where had she even come from? She'd just appeared, like she always did. He stepped to the side, keeping them all in sight. Pantera held in front of him with one hand, the other clenched into a fist beside him. Her arms were crossed, her sharp green eyes disapproving, her spiritual pressure oppressive, purposefully so. Grimmjow could feel it, like something grabbing the back of his neck and pushing him down to the ground. He growled low, about to raise his own Ryatsu in challenge, when, suddenly, she reached out an empty hand to him, palm up, and looked at him expectantly. The pressure disappeared. He stared at her with electric blue eyes, wild and sparkling, before sheathing his sword and handing over the imaging device. He stuffed his fists back into his pockets, slouching back against the wall. Not for a second did he let the former Tres Espada and her glorified servants leave his field of vision. Everything's in there, he said, jerking his head towards the small machine. I see. So no written report, as usual. TCH. Haribel didn't sigh. She didn't need to. How did you survive so long under Aizen Sa under Aizen? Had Shalong write them all out for me, Grimmjow said, waving a hand dismissively. I don't do long-ass reports. You want journal entries, send Neliel. At this point, I might. Be my guest. You know for a fact the goat-headed idiot would be the first one out of all of us to get caught in that stupid trap. Probably do us all a favor. Her eyes widened. So you found it. He made a sound of irritation. Like I said, it's all in there. Grimmjow paused, brows pinched together fiercely as he looked at her straight in the eye. Give it back when you're done. Hannibal looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. As you wish. He grunted and straightened, glowering at the 3 sorry excuses for a rancor behind her, 2 of whom had been gesturing rudely and making grotesque faces at him the whole time. Sung Sun stood there with them, creepy and silent as usual, and no less annoying for it. She was the quiet instigator who stirred up the other 2 barking dogs, and he was sure she was smiling like the evil snake she was behind that sleeve. Mila Rose and Apache were always easy to bait and quick to bite. It would have been more entertaining if he wasn't constantly on the receiving end of all their bullshit. You need to control those idiots, he said coldly, turning back to Hannibal. It's pathetic, the way you always gotta come and save their skins. He turned to the idiots in question. If I find out a single one of you tried to get into my room again, I'll turn you into smears on the wall. Fuck you and your room, Mila Rose spat. As if we don't have better things to do. Pretty sure you don't, he snarled, cracking his knuckles. I told you to fucking stay away and I meant it. He took a second to give them a thorough once-over. Mila Rose's crispy hair was from the bala, but he also saw Apache's singed eyebrows and burns on Sung Sun's sleeve. His eyes narrowed. So that's what it was, send a distraction while the other 2 worked the lock. Ha! It looked like the booby traps had worked. As if he'd let the likes of these bottom feeders get the best of him. Maybe associating with that sleazy blonde worm of a Shinigami had its perks, after all. Next time, limbs are coming off. The thought of it brought a savage smile to his face. Then we'll just make Ion stupid and crush your dumb little room. Apache waved her middle fingers at his face and approached him with a weird crab-like dance. What are you hiding in there anyway? None of your fucking business. It took a mountain of self-control and several well-placed ballasts to drive them away, hissing and cursing like the feral witches they were. Hannibal stood by and watched with her arms crossed once again, wearing a resigned and long-suffering air like the cloak of a true monarch. They both knew if she hadn't been there, Grimmjow would have loosed at least a Gran Rey Zero, maybe even gone into his released form and whipped out Discarin. Why not? He hadn't used it for a while, not since he'd last fought Kurosaki in Hugo Mundo. Striding through echoing halls, memories of that battle came back to him in flashes: white bone and red blood, brown eyes and orange hair, 2 bodies spinning in the air, energy lashing at each other in waves, exchanging blows over and over again until he felt like he was melting. He'd come so close to winning, to gutting that damn Shinigami and feeling wet entrails hot and squishy in his claws, and then that healing woman had screamed at Kurosaki, somehow turning those hard copper eyes into soft amber and a scowl into a smile. Grimmjow remembered a strong hand capturing his own in an iron fist. He recalled warm skin against his wrist as he was laid gently on the sand. His hand spasmed at the memory. He opened it wide and closed it hard, feeling nails dig into his palm. After that had been a promise still not kept. Since Kurosaki left him bleeding in the sand, Grimmjow's life had been a mess, waking up covered in Neliel's tears and puke. The slow, painful recovery before devouring as many hollows as he could to regain his strength. Meeting a so-called handsome yet humble shady shopkeeper, then those fucking Archer assholes precipitating a whole new cycle of violence and bloodshed. One that had almost destroyed the balance of all 3 worlds. Kurosaki Ichigo, the great hero, of course, had come through once again and defeated the big bad evil Quincy. Even weakened to bonelessness by Askin's poison, Grimmjow had been able to feel the depth of Kurosaki's almost intoxicating Ryatsu unleashed during that final battle. He'd tasted the bittersweet tang of hollow powers flooding through the Shinigami's spiritual energy. The memory made him tingle. Thoughts of the orange-haired man continued to pester him as he walked to his room. Purposefully chosen to be as far away from the others as possible, it was a place of quiet and solitude. Or at least, it was meant to be. As he approached it, he could see burn marks and scuffs scattered on the smooth walls around his door. He smelled singed hair and charred flesh. Grimmjow chuckled in dark satisfaction as he pressed the flat of his hand against a glass panel beside the door. Light flashed over it briefly. There was a short, low-pitched hum, a click, and the door slid to the side before him. He stepped in and immediately closed and locked it again, swiping a hand against the inside glass panel. There wasn't much in his room. Some clothes were scattered here and there. Black pants and shirts were dark stains against everything else which, like the rest of Los Noches, was bleach white and sterile. A narrow, unused bed gathered dust in a corner. A tall wardrobe stood beside a chest of drawers, which held a mirror and an almost empty industrial-sized tub of extra-firm hold-hair gel. He could hear the screeches of delight the tres idiotas would make if they ever stumbled across any of this. Grimmjow had a sudden horrifying vision of Ion with hair greased into spikes like that crazy Shinigami captain who had finished Enoitra off and not a moment too soon and made a face. He checked to see how much gel was left and found it running low, making a note to visit the Urahara Shoten when he was done with his other, bigger secret. Speaking of which, looking furtively behind and around him, he opened the wardrobe door and shoved aside the clothes that hung on one side, pressing his hand to the back. Another hum and click. Empty, echoing space opened up in front of him. One more glance behind him to make sure he wasn't being followed before he plunged into the darkness, making sure to lock the door behind him. His eyes adjusted instantly. A long, narrow hall stretched ahead. On either side, many rooms, one after the other. He ignored most of them as he walked past, knowing that none of the others were aware of this place. Judging by the rotting corpses left in giant free-standing glass tubes in the newer rooms and piles of rusted shackles left in others, it had been used as Shylaporo's dumping ground for failed experiments, and before that, Barragan's dungeons. Grimmjow himself had stolen the floorplan after the dust had settled, and the Quincy's had been driven out of Hucomundo. The remaining Arrancar claimed Los Noches as their home and efforts were made to repair and recover as much as they could. So Grimmjow had prowled into every room that had been forbidden to him during Aizen's reign after Hannibal asked him to gather intelligence and information about Los Noches and its workings. He'd taken whatever looked important and dumped it at her feet, before wreaking havoc on all the ugly Shinigami shit that was left behind. He particularly savored the memory of smashing Aizen's precious, delicate little teacups one by one, crushing them underfoot or throwing them against the wall, sometimes hurling them into the sky and firing a Zero to obliterate them into ashes. And, though technically Arrancar had no use for bodily functions like eating or sleeping, some had indulged in them during their time as Espada. Stack barely woke up unless it was an emergency, and Neliel had regular meal times before Enoitra had brained her and thrown her out into the desert. Now, Grimmjow took generous pleasure in marking his territory everywhere, not only in places he'd been denied access to before. One of his proudest memories was standing at the head of the huge table they'd been forced to gather at for coma-inducingly boring meetings, whipping his dick out and streaming piss in magnificent arcing cascades over the chairs and the walls and floors and sometimes ceilings too, if he aimed just right. He'd even done it here in this ancient secret place that had been kept hidden from almost all of them until Grimmjow glanced at a diagram and quickly stuffed it into a pocket before anyone else could see. The moment he saw it, he could tell there was no surveillance in this area of Los Noches. Hannibal had forbidden him from messing with the electrics, especially in the one big room full of screens that monitored every corner of the castle. He used it himself now and again to check what latest tricks the ogre trio attempted when they tried to sneak into his room, but otherwise he avoided it. Jin had shown it to Grimmjow and his Fraxian during a so-called introductory tour after their evolution from Ajuchas into Arrancar. What had that weirdo said? "Come on now, new friends, this is a very special room. Actually, it might be a little naughty of me to show it to you." The silver-haired man had raised a finger to his lips, curved slightly in a smile. "So this has to stay our little secret." His voice dropped to an oily whisper. "Can I trust you?" He'd opened the door, and instantly the light from dozens of screens had overpowered Grimmjow's senses in his newly formed humanoid body. He looked away, eyes burning and tearing up from this unfamiliar illumination. Hearing nothing but a jumble, seeing just enough to understand that almost every corner of Los Noches and its surrounding structures was being watched. They were being watched. Ikamaru-jin had creeped him out enormously even then, but something he'd said stuck with Grimmjow since that moment. This is how we keep an eye on ya. Make sure you're all behaving like good little soldiers. We gave you power, and we need to make sure you don't abuse it, don't we? So don't mind the cameras. Grimmjow came to a stop. Cameras. That's what these things were called, to keep them under constant scrutiny. Camera, not chimera. The irony made him grin. So, the machine Aizen Sasuke had used to try and control them had now been given freely to Grimmjow by another mad Shinigami, in a different form, freeing him instead of tracking or watching or hunting him. Jin clearly wanted to sow some mistrust amongst them, now that he thought about it, and it had worked. After that day, nothing in Los Noches ever felt safe again. Grimmjow hungered for power and recognition. It had been the only reason he'd considered Aizen's offer of becoming an Arrancar after all, but the knowledge that he was being surveilled, everywhere, all the time, made him feel constantly on edge. Not to mention Konim Towson's ever-present distrustful attention, and Ulquira's fucking eye trick. Looking around him, the dimness and silence of these abandoned halls was a balm on his frazzled nerves. Grimmjow gusted a frustrated sigh and continued on his way. The floorplan he found had been studied carefully, and he discovered this old wing of the castle hiding almost in plain sight, connected by a hidden door to one of Shiloporo's old rooms. Rotting corpses and rusted handcuffs aside, he had managed to find treasure here. No doubt Aizen Sasuke had spent much of his time watching over his toy soldiers, brewing tea and hatching nefarious, all-powerful plans of world domination, but it looked like the man also had time for hobbies. In several of these locked chambers, hidden reminders of his old life almost reached the ceiling. Piles of luxurious paper, slabs of solid ink and bundles of wooden sticks with soft brushes. Grimmjow dimly remembered once seeing the former Shinigami dip one of those brushes into a well of black liquid and paint onto sheets of paper. His movements controlled, fluid, graceful. It was the way he used all of his tools. It had been so tempting to tear it all apart at first, crush those black slabs into powder and rip the paper into shreds, but Grimmjow decided that it would be much more satisfying to take all these painstakingly gathered materials and create something so deeply un-Aizen-like that the man's soul would be tortured by it all the way down in the depths of that crazy Shinigami prison he was locked inside. So he had spat onto the ink and created watery black foam that he smeared wildly all over that pristine white paper. He splashed and sprayed and threw it everywhere, then started scrawling doodles of Ulquira burning in eternal flames. Konim Towson's disgusting bloated bug body exploded into scraps, Luppy's decapitated head shedding tears, and pinned them wherever he could, letting his imagination and deep sense of spite run wild until sketches of death and destruction became wallpaper. It was a good thing he didn't wear white anymore, and even better when he managed to find a way to get water flowing to a nearby room so he could clean black marks from his skin and hair. The thought of bathing never really appealed to him, and he had no one to impress anyway. But the thought of the endless questions he would face from the others if they saw him with ink stains on his hands made him want to release a zero into his own mouth. So it was a sacrifice worth making. Before long, Grimmjow came to the room he was searching for. Once again he checked behind and around him. He sniffed the air. A pause. Certain he was alone, he opened the door and stepped inside, closing it noiselessly behind him. In one hand he lit a bala, letting it gather and grow in the palm of his hand until it was bright enough to illuminate the room he was in, before using it to light several candles scattered throughout. He was running low on them too. He definitely needed to visit Urahara's store before he ran out. Candlelight guttered. The shadows it created were blue-black in the gloom, but it was enough for his sensitive eyes to pick out the edges of the windows that lined one of the walls. Walking towards one, he extinguished the bala held in his palm, placed his hands on the sill and stared outside at the perpetual night of Hugomundo, finally allowing himself to relax. Blue eyebrows became less pinched and his nose unwrinkled. For a long while, he stood there, watching. Not only did this old area of the castle lack camera surveillance, it looked out onto the desert. Their real home, not the visual stink of a replica sky from Soul Society or the human world. From here he had spent hours sitting and observing, witnessing the arc of the moon as it was devoured into nothing by the sky before growing round and full once more, over and over again. A place of stillness, darkness, peace. The womb in which his violent heart had first lashed out and hungered ceaselessly. He smelled the faintest scent of hot metal and bleached bone. There was no wind to disturb the endless sand. The muscles around his eyes softened. Grimmjow turned to the rest of his lair. Everything was as he'd left it. In one corner lay his nest of pillows and blankets, stolen from Stack's room. Pitchers of water and scraps of paper hung everywhere, filled with disturbing doodles. His latest project was still displayed prominently. There was no foreign smell, no minute disturbance his acute senses could catch. He was safe. He took off his jacket, his shoes and belts and placed Pantera carefully in sight, moved back a step and looked at his setup. It wasn't bad, almost finished. Just something missing. Tilting his head from side to side, pacing back and forth, he circled it like the predator he was. He squinted his eyes and stared hard, weighing up options, deciding. It took him a long time before he started to get to work, but once he did, the hours passed without him noticing. Cherry blossoms were still tightly closed on graduation day. Ichigo woke to a pale, icy blue sky and lay in bed while he stared at his formal school uniform, which had been flawlessly pressed and cleaned with a lint roller the night before. Dust had been scrubbed off. Loose buttons had been sewed back on. Then, somehow, it had been snuck into his room and hung from the back of the door. He'd told himself he was going to skip the ceremony altogether. He had been adamant about it. But now, seeing the effort Yusu had gone to, Ichigo threw himself back onto his sheets, tempted to curse her. She always knew exactly how to play him. He fought off Khan's irritating attention-grabbing efforts. He washed, showered, dressed on autopilot, and did his best to shrug it all off at breakfast, wriggling uncomfortably in clothes that felt stiff and constricting. But the sight of Yusu's beaming smile alone was enough to cancel out Karen's deep eye roll as he grabbed a piece of toast and walked towards the door. "Niai-chan, just toast?" Yusu exclaimed. "You've got a long day ahead of you, right? You need more. I made rice, miso soup, fish." "Let him go, Yuzu. More for me." "Karen-chan." No ungrai Yuzu," Ichigo called as he tied his shoes, his words muffled by the bread hanging out his mouth. "Ya, thangs effer unifum." Shouldering his bag, he took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped outside. The sunlight felt too weak, and the air insubstantial. His chest constricted with familiar tightness and his legs felt like they'd been cast out of lead instead of flesh and bone. It was like walking through molasses. The toast settled on his tongue as a coat of ash as he chewed on it slowly. When, one by one, his friends joined him on the walk to school, he was floating alongside them, barely present. When they talked to him, he had the impression he was hearing them speak from the precipice of another world. Words came to him through a haze, and he was unfocused, late in replying to questions. Out of the corner of his eye he caught concerned glances, and ignored them. Drawing closer to the school, he saw how much effort had been put into the ceremony. Brightly colored banners and signs were hung up over the school. A hum of excitement buzzed in the air and groups of students gathered and broke apart in loose fluid dribbles, chatting and grabbing each other for photos. As he passed the different classrooms, he heard snippets of animated conversation. "I can't believe she got in. Such a prestigious school. You know, I don't even mind. I'd rather get married anyway. Dude, I can't wait to meet hot big city chicks. I hear they make 'em different. This crappy town doesn't even start to compare." He rolled his eyes at the last one. The commotion, bordering on frenzy, washed over him without seeming to touch him. They had to rehearse the entrance and exit of each class. Speeches had to be made. Certificates had to be presented and accepted in a very orderly and precise manner. Ichigo felt his attention drift. Exhaustion weighed on him heavily, and he could barely keep his eyes open. During the ceremony itself, he felt himself go through the motions as if he was outside his own body. When his name was announced, he barely remembered stumbling on stage to accept his certificate and bow several times to teachers and his fellow students before heading back to his class. Names droned on endlessly. More bowing and speeches. The school song was sung, and then they were clapped out of the hall by the younger students. The rest of the day passed in a smudge, and the day after that, and the day after that. He was walking in a shadow world. His friends went their separate ways while he stayed behind, their paths splintering, his world disintegrating. Everything was dulled, bleached, coming apart at the edges. The only thing he itched for. White sands. A hole was torn through his chest. His heart was missing. A black sword thrust into Ishida's stomach. His sword. A shattered dome, endless night stretching away as far as the eye could see. Memories, half buried, barely focused, shown in patchwork. A kaleidoscopic parade of his pain and humiliation. Another blade, this time slid into Ichigo's ribcage, as a cruel smile slid over Jinju's lips. Rain, darkness. Nothing had ever compared to that night. How many swords had broken his skin? How much blood had he shed? It didn't matter. Ichigo could take it, would suffer it all until the end, gladly, if it kept his family safe. It was one thing to trick him, string him along with some bullshit plan, with ulterior motives. That had been the story of his life since Rukia had transferred her powers to him, after all those years ago, but it was a completely different thing to fuck with his friends and his family. Jinju's face, his cold-blooded smirk, the sadistic joy in his eyes, appeared before him. Ichigo felt it again. He was back there, back at that house, lured into the trap. Rain drenched him. He was on his knees, his power draining away, drawn out of him by that goddamn sword in his chest. He felt the emptiness grow inside, could feel himself become a husk. Then nothing. Then a sick, slow surge up his throat like bile. The despair, the grief, the powerlessness. The darkness within him turned into a monster with endless wings and spindly dark limbs that pressed its many claws over Ichigo's face, forcing his eyes and his nose and his mouth open, pushing him down, down, down into the ground that was now wet and melted and rising and covering him like quicksand, filling his ears first before spilling over his eyes and down into his mouth, choking him. He awoke with a strangled sound, sheets tangled between his legs. He was drenched in sweat. His pillow had fallen, or had he thrown it in his restlessness? Willing his heart to slow down, Ichigo pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. They felt like they'd been plucked out of his sockets and rolled in used cat litter before being popped back in. For a while he lay and stared at the ceiling, exhausted, angry, his skin feeling like it didn't quite fit over the rest of his body. Another sleepless night. Another nightmare, but this one had been different, more intense, a harder edge, with a sense of dread that seeped into every pore of his body. It was never any use trying to get back to sleep once they'd woken him up. The twisted dreams usually followed one another, cursed little creatures that skittered through his mind, poking sharpened nails into the crevices of his brain and hungrily lapping up all the pain, regret, suffering he tried to put behind him. In these dreams, like in real life, he was pierced with swords, holes were punched through his chest, his limbs broken and torn away. He'd seen his loved ones with their faces skinned, skulls grinning, coming closer to him and dripping blood into his open mouth as he screamed silently. More often than not, Ichigo woke during the night bathed in shadows and cold sweat, shaking, shuddering, gasping for breath. He banished Khan to the girl's room, unable to face the mod soul's obnoxious concern that mounted with each sleepless night that passed. Cherry blossoms bloomed, faded, fell. Spring edged closer to summer. Homework he should have completed in order to retake his exams piled up on his desk. Lists of to-dos. Should DOS have to DOS to get his life back on track got longer. But after nights like these he could never find the motivation or the energy to do the work he knew he needed to do. He couldn't sleep during the night and couldn't concentrate during the day. Deadlines approached, and he watched them get closer and closer before they passed him by completely. In the meantime, he did odd jobs for Ikumi, mowing lawns, walking dogs, getting groceries for the people who couldn't do it themselves, things that got him out the house and put his body to work without too much input from his mind. The only thing holding him together, funnily enough, were the hollows. Chad, Inao, Ishida, and the others had left for their studies outside of Karakura after graduation, so Ichigo was left with the dubious honor of taking care of the town on his own. He knew Soul Society was too busy rebuilding itself from the ground up after their near-total decimation to spare a Shinigami for regular patrols. Seeing one of their own, broken as he was already there. Ichigo felt perversely grateful for it. Adrenaline was the only thing that made him feel anything anymore. Anything to get his blood, which had felt like molasses in his veins recently, hot and liquid and tearing through him again. Ironic that he felt more alive when he was dead. Ironic that he'd wanted to be normal for so long, to not see spirits and be left alone. And instead of being a real teenager, his life had turned into constant battle. Adrenaline-soaked fights to the death and beyond rescue missions, constantly running, training, fighting to become stronger, all so he could fulfill the duty his name bore him. One who protects. Sometimes it felt like an anchor around his neck, weighing him down into the endless dark ocean his inner world had turned into. Other times, when he felt Zangetsu in his hands, when energy thrummed through his body in beautiful wild instinctual harmony, lashing from his hands and his blade, he felt like he had wings. These days he had enough control over his powers and his Ryatsu to sense other spiritual beings and how far away they were, how powerful they were. But no hollow had presented enough of a challenge for a while. Even Huko Mundo must still be reeling, he knew, from repeated invasions and conquests. No doubt they'd be rebuilding their world too, just like Soul Society. He wondered what Nell was doing. He thought of Grimmjow, and remembered seeing the sun haloed by blue sky while he'd been sitting in front of his mother's grave weeks ago. It had been so fresh and vivid. That shock of color still vibrated inside his lungs like he'd inhaled it. Memories of blue hair and eyes, wild shit-eating grins full of fangs, taunts thrown back and forth while they spat up blood, steel-meeting claws while rending flesh apart, shivered through him. Claws and hands and wrists held in his grip, and Grimmjow's face, so blank and bored when Ichigo first saw it through the piano-toothed opening of the Discora after all those years, until that sadistic smile came back accompanied by mockery and sarcasm, and the familiar dance began again, only to be interrupted by Nell's spectacular entrance. "I'll fight you whenever you want." Why hadn't he come back, demanding his rematch? All that talk about being a sworn enemy and saving the world just so he could fight Ichigo in it. But Ichigo hadn't seen iron hide nor blue hair of him. Grimmjow was alive, he knew that much. He'd heard the Arankar had even visited invaded Soul Society after Ichwach's death and, true to form, tried to start a fight with every high-ranking Shinigami he encountered. But it was ultimately Nell who was chosen to be some sort of hollow version of a diplomat or ambassador, meeting in neutral territory at the Urahara Shoten to discuss terms of agreements or truces or whatever. Ichigo had chosen to stay out of those dull affairs, but wondered if he could, or should, or was even allowed to visit Huko Mundo. He barely remembered what happened after the final battle. Presumably he'd passed out, woken up, recovered as he always did. But the thought that he'd left Nell and the others behind where they'd fallen yet again festered unpleasantly, guilt pricking and poking at him from the inside out. He wanted to see her again. And he wanted. He craved. The years had changed him. Too often, Ichigo could feel his body shake out of nowhere, feel his heart racing, adrenaline pumping. Too often his senses were on high alert, eyes sharp, and he longed to let his lizard brain take over, his body becoming nothing but the lines of energy and instinct and bone-deep determination that had carried him through suicide missions in all 3 worlds. No grades, no exams, no thought of the future, just the urgency of here and now, and fight and win and save and protect. With the memory of battle came an undeniable rush. Then, afterwards, anger. Adrenaline rose and fell, crested and plunged into something that was becoming a constant, low-grade fury. What was the use of any of this? What would he even do in the living world? Here, he was useless. His days and nights had become a blur of bad dreams, exhaustion, chores, avoiding his family, and errands for Ikumi. He could barely concentrate, living in a world of monotony, feeling raw, like his skin had been peeled off and his nerves were exposed to the atmosphere. Ichigo knew he would have been more useful to everyone if he could only... Maybe. Could he? Over time, a plan formed in the fog of his mind, condensed from something nebulous into real possibility. Ichigo just had to play his cards right. It was utterly insane, but since when had he ever half-assed anything? It would be beneficial for everyone involved. His family would understand, his dad most of all. Isshin had done basically the same thing anyway. For a little while, Ichigo considered and thought and passed the idea back and forth like he was tossing a ball from one hand to another. But it came to a head one night, a strong one, a challenge. A real fight showed up at the children's park in the early hours of the morning. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like he had been sliced in half and left to limp through the rest of his life, when an electric fizzle jumped up his spine and he shot up. Before he was even conscious of it, his substitute badge was pressed to his chest. His warm human body hastily arranged under the sheets, he opened the window and was out like a shot, speeding through the air, following the hum of a sharp acidic energy that was lying in wait. Predatory. Is it? When he arrived, it was cold and dark outside, the period of deepest night just before dawn. A light breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. There was no sound of traffic, just the drone of electricity powering generators and vending machines. There was no one in the park but him. Ichigo closed his eyes and concentrated. There, a shadow murkier than the others slithered at the edges of his awareness. He could see its edges like black waters lapping at a shoreline. It changed shape and disappeared as he tried to pin down its location, its Ryatsu slipping through his hold. He scrunched his eyes, forced his breathing to even out and deepen, and let his instinct rise, serpentine and predatory, watching, sensing. Something slashed at him from behind. He dodged, unsheathed Zenjutsu, and returned the blow in the same breath, opening his eyes. A gruesome sight met him: too many clawed tentacles writhing in a mass of sticky black tar that bulged and wriggled from behind an uneven white mask, where long sharp fangs dripped poison, and bulbous, acid yellow eyeballs rotated and sank and resurfaced grotesquely. "Well now, you smell pretty good," it breathed, its voice nails across a chalkboard. "Looks like my favorites might not get here for a while anyway. My mistake. How do you fancy being a midnight snack, orange one?" A hiss, and the hollow disappeared, sinking into the ground and spreading like a stain. Ichigo swore and rose into the air, narrowly avoiding a spike that shot at him from the bubbling morass. Several more followed, and he grit his teeth, swung Zenjutsu through them. They collapsed. Black slime dripped from his sword. "You're not as young as I usually like them," the hollow's whisper echoed, its voice full of evil glee. "And you don't scream the way I like them to either. No fun at all. Adults are so boring." Ichigo was breathing heavily. Red clouded his vision. "You're not touching a single kid, you sick fuck." "Oh, but I've already touched so many," it groaned, longing and throaty. It made a slick, upsettingly organic sound as it rose and formed into something dripping and swamp-like, yellow eyes glowing and sharp teeth spinning to form a wicked smile. "The younger, the better. Ooh, ever so tasty and tender and fresh they are. I gobble them up in a single mouthful. But it's never enough. Such small servings, you know?" It cackled, a shrill noise that seared the inside of his ears. A great, roaring fury, a towering inferno, rose in Ichigo and burned away everything else. His skin felt like it was on fire. He didn't even remember going into Bankai. He barely remembered the fight it put up. But he relished the ache in his muscles and the dampness of sweat on his forehead. It didn't take long to slice it in two with a roar, and, as it started to disintegrate, the gates of hell appeared to drag it inside. The creature let out an unearthly shriek of fear and panic, while Ichigo stared, breath coming hard, shaking, unable to stop a satisfied smile growing at the sight. He'd been to hell, after all. He knew exactly what that monster was in for. The battle cleared his head. In that instant he made his decision. This was what he was made for. To destroy evil, to protect the innocent and the good. To fight. Ichigo stayed there long after the corrupted soul had been pulled inside the gates. His blood was still fizzing. He thought of sand in his eyes, the weight of his mask, white-hot pain raking through his body and wild blue eyes. He'd been so sure it was. Maybe Grimmjow had forgotten the promise Ichigo made. Maybe in the heat of the moment they just said things to each other. Things about why scars were kept and future fights, ambition and fear and pride and loneliness. Grimmjow never failed to threaten death and destruction on him every time they met, but it had never been boring. Being around him on the battlefield was like letting hot animal instinct and cold logic run in parallel lines from his hands like reins, the same way he had felt handling his two swords. The best and the worst of him exposed, for all the world to see. The blue-haired, wild-eyed Arrancar kept running through his thoughts as he made his way home, until it clicked. Grimmjow was the key. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Through constant consideration and the slow drip of frustration, Grimmjow became the linchpin of this plan, the hinge on which success depended. It haunted him. Schemes and strategies rolled through his mind. What would it take to lure the former Espada out of his territory? To hold him to his word? Ichigo thought of him and thought of clawed hands digging into his insides, the slice of razor-sharp blades that edged feline limbs in a sleek white armored form, so elegant and agile and deadly. He'd heard Grimmjow, too, had gotten stronger in the years they'd spent apart. Would he look the same? Would he still feel the same, act the same, manic and untamed, excited to see the dirt and filth in Ichigo's soul in a way no one else ever had been? Would he still cackle and taunt and jibe and slash at him like black robes, brown eyes, orange hair were the only things he could see? Ichigo wondered what he needed to do to bring the blue-haired Arrancar into the living world. It was no use visiting Huko Mundo in his Shinigami form. It was the fleshy carcass he dragged around with it that was the problem. He just needed to draw out the solution. As it turned out, he didn't need to wait long. Grimmjow idly cracked his neck as his bored gaze raked over Karakura, Pesquisa already picking out the spiritual signatures of the people he was looking for. The sun was close to the center of a bright blue sky and heat rippled in the air. In the west, one river split into two silver threads. He saw them, the humans, crawling like so many ants in and out of their square concrete shells, walking over earth covered in concrete, using their metal vehicles that gleamed and scuttled through concrete in a place that seemed so ordinary on the surface and held such deep secrets. The town had hardly changed in the years since he first visited. Or maybe it had, who knew? He didn't care about normal, boring human shit. He couldn't completely hide his Ryatsu, but held it close to him as a second skin, hardening already tough Hyro until Aizen himself would have struggled to put a crack in it. It was enough to stop the Shinigami from sensing his presence and sending someone after him, someone he would have to kill, of course. And then Harable would be pissed and Soul Society would be in an uproar and they'd all be back to square one. Not that he gave a fuck. As long as there was still somewhere he and his sworn enemy could meet in battle again. Everything else could crumble into dust and sand for all he cared. But despite everything, he had fond memories of this place. Soul Society had even up and sliced this whole town out of the human world to stop Aizen, then plopped it right back. His Fraxian had died in battle here. 2 fights with Kurosaki, the first that had cost him his arm and his rank, a streak of crimson-tinged obsidian energy slicing into his chest even after he absolutely wailed on the kid. And Kurosaki, the crazy indestructible bastard, had taken it all and stood up and unleashed that eldritch horror with a fierce smile on his face. Then he'd pulled out that fucking mask the second time, his eyes turning poison yellow, the taste of him so raw it had scorched the back of Grimmjow's throat. Might as well get the boring shit over and done with, he thought, then the fun can start. A familiar pressure rippled through the atmosphere like a wave. No matter where he was Hugo the human world, soul society, hell, even in the empty spaces between them he could always feel that presence. Usually warm and golden like honey, now Kurosaki's Ryatsu felt stagnant, stale and heavy, and it was fluctuating strangely. It made Grimmjow pause and left a dry, unsatisfying taste in his mouth, like old blood. For a split second he hesitated, then made his choice. "I'll fucking deal with you in a minute, asshole," he muttered, using Sonido to travel to the eastern edge of the town in the space of a breath. He landed in the dusty courtyard in front of an old-fashioned building, walking towards the entrance. Jinta was there, and the object he was holding, a baseball bat, if Grimmjow remembered correctly, dropped to the ground as he spotted Grimmjow and his eyes widened. "Whoa, what are you doing? Are you allowed here? What if the Shinigami see?" "Buzz off," he drawled, flicking Jinta's forehead while taking care not to blast the kid's skull wide open. "I got special permission to be here." Not exactly the truth, but not a lie either. He entered, and it was blessedly dark and cool, unlike the pressing humid heat outside. Rows of candy stretched out before him, in all different shapes, colors, and flavors. He hadn't tried a single one of them. Not only was he repulsed by human food, but treating everything Urahara Kisuke had a hand in with a healthy amount of suspicion was the only correct way to treat him. Walking straight past them all, deeper into the interior, where he pulled off his shoes and dropped them haphazardly next to pairs of sneakers and wouldn't get a neatly lined up in rows. He opened sliding paper doors and stepped into a dim hallway. He frowned, looking around him. Where was that bastard? Grimmjow-san, what a semi-pleasant surprise. Grimmjow barely stopped himself from flinching and turned with as much composure as someone could while clenching their teeth and fantasizing about fingers sinking deep into fleshy, bloody guts. It wasn't often people or anything really took him by surprise, but this fucker always managed. Urahara Kisuke looked the same as usual, wearing loose green robes, with a striped bucket hat shading his eyes and blonde stubble on his chin, matching the unruly blonde hair that stuck out from underneath the brim of his hat. If you knew what you were looking for and dared to get close enough to check, you could see faint lines criss-crossing his face behind the paper fan that he held. But no amount of fan or hat or shadow could conceal the calculating glint in his eyes. Grimmjow's own eyes narrowed to cobalt blue slits. "Do that again and I'll gut you." "Ah, your signature move." The glint brightened. "Adorable that you think you could do that to someone who just managed to sneak up on you so easily. But anyway, I'm sure you haven't traveled across space and time just to make idle threats, even though I know that's exactly the kind of person you are." The fan snapped closed and he tapped it on his chin, humming thoughtfully. "I have a feeling it's serious. Perhaps this is something best discussed over some tea." "Absolutely not." He recoiled immediately. "No tea at meetings. Never again." "Have I triggered something? Oops. All right then, coffee it is. Come along now." He led the way to a large traditional-style room, almost empty apart from a low wooden table with a blanket attached and surrounded by cushions. They sat and, as if by magic actually, probably literally by magic, knowing the layers of Kaido that had been woven into the very foundations of this place, Tessai immediately appeared, holding a tray laden with a steaming metal pot and 2 cups. He bowed, placed it on the table, and disappeared like sea mist at dawn. They both sat. Urahara filled both cups with black, evil-looking liquid from the pot and took a sip from one. Earthy. Enough dirt to take the skin off the inside of your mouth. He's outdone himself. Grimmjow picked up his cup delicately and sniffed the contents. The scent was pungent but not unpleasant. Slowly, carefully, he dipped the tip of his tongue in this coffee. He immediately gagged and spat back into the cup. Disgusting. Hideous. Excruciating. An acquired taste, but many people swear by it. I take it you're not a fan. No shit. You trying to get me poisoned again? I would never, the fan fluttered. But good to know you're not a fan of tea or coffee. Tessai's going to have to try to be more inventive. Anyway, the fan shut, and the jovial smile on the blond man's face faded, growing more serious. Let's get down to business. I'm assuming that since you're here, you're the one who found it. Grimmjow pulled a fat envelope from a voluminous pocket and threw it on the table. Printed glossy photographs sliding out, scenes of a desert, interrupted by a rocky cliff face rising suddenly out of the sand, a narrow cave. He jabbed a finger at it. In here. This was close as I could get. Tell me everything. Urahara was sitting up straight, fan placed aside. Hundreds of trails led there, from all directions. Most everything less powerful than a Jillian just disappears 10 zeros distance away from the entrance of the cave. Gillians get ripped apart at 7. I got till 2. And then? He frowned. Then, I couldn't get any closer. Otherwise it would have got me too. It was, attracting me. Pulling me towards it. Fascinating, Urahara murmured. Hollow bait from the Quincy's. Yes. And no. Hollow bait isn't alive. This felt alive. The bone of his mask itched and Grimmjow scratched at it. And it wasn't just Quincy energy in there. I sensed hollows and Shinigami too. Probably something Shiloporo made that was tweaked by your resident freak show. Mayuri's eccentric, sure, but... Your freak show, he repeated firmly. Fucked with it afterwards. Then the Quincy's come along and looks like they thought, yeah, why not? Why not add to this bullshit? Why not fuck this place up some more? Not like anybody's living here or anything. Growling, he slammed a fist down on the table. Cups rattled and coffee spilled. Silence bloomed, tense. The fan had been taken and was tapping fast against one green-clad knee. I see. Understood. Tell Haribel-san I'll work on what she wants, and I'll let you know when it can be tested. Until then, I'll give you something to help. He rose and gestured for Grimmjow to follow him into a dark storeroom piled high with cardboard boxes, plastic tubs, and a deep freezer the size of a small boat. He opened it, its cold electric light turning his face into slices of black and white, pressed a button and pulled something towards him. The back of the freezer opened up and revealed stacks of metal tubes that were as long as his forearm and spiked at one end. He took a handful and inspected them carefully, pressed buttons that turned lights from red to green, and muttered to himself. Looks like the cold works. Good. Here. Urahara held them out to Grimmjow. Take these, activate them like I show you, and plant them in a circle as close as you can to the site. That should help me make the calculations, and we can start from there. The rest of the visit passed quickly. Along with Urahara's mysterious tools, Grimmjow picked up candles and hair gel for himself, bath oils for Haribel, a sack of potatoes for the beasts, and bottles of soy sauce and sesame oil for Nelio, paying for them with diagrams and plans of Hugo-Mundo's infrastructure Haribel had given her permission to share. Tugging on his shoes, taking bags in hand, and trying not to break into Sonido when he felt familiar energy creeping up on the edges of his consciousness, he paused before he left. So, the shopkeeper was watching him. Grimmjow wasn't fooled by the vacant cheeriness of his expression. So, Grimmjow-san, the fuck is up with Kurosaki, then? A tilt of the head. The fan opened. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't give me that shit. I can't fight him to the death if he's being a little bitch. Ah, well, Urahara sighed. Kurosaki-san has been through a lot, even considering he's a strong kid. The best student I've ever had. Not that I've had many, I've always been more of a researcher, you see. Get to the point, Grimmjow snapped. He could feel Kurosaki's Ryatsu growing more and more restless, lashing out, agitated. His fingers were tingling. He dumped the bag full of goods from the shop unceremoniously next to the jenkin where the shoes were kept and loosened Pantera in her sheath. Urahara's eyes flashed. I wouldn't go after him today, of all days. Chi. So tell me what's wrong with him and fix it. His fist clenched and unclenched around the hilt of his sword. He has a promise to keep. I'm really not sure there's much I can do for him, short of kidnapping him and forcing him to spar in the basement. Perfect, let's do that. I think he might have gotten tired of that approach. No. Urahara was almost talking to himself at this point. He's done enough. He needs some time to recover from everything. Seriously? He's barely out of his teens, Grimmjow-san. I know you might not be in a position to appreciate what that means, but really, it's best that he gets to live more of a normal human life after all the excitement of the last few years. He deserves that much, at least. Oh yeah, and who decided that? You and all your high and mighty Shinigami friends? Grimmjow couldn't contain his scorn. Ha, there you go again, making decisions about his life and keeping him in the dark about it. Typical controlling assholes. A sly look. One would almost think you were concerned about his welfare. I don't give a shit about his welfare. As long as he can make good on what he told me, the rest can rot. I see. Urahara's voice was calm, but electricity spat and crackled around him. Grimmjow felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, but refused to take the bait. Stunning personal growth, as far as he was concerned. Kurosaki's welfare is everyone's business, he said finally, as evenly as he could manage when all he wanted to do was draw his sword, press its tip between the scientist's stormy gray eyes, and push. That little shit could level entire cities without breaking a sweat. You really sure you want all that power wound up in a puny little human body, ready to explode? 'Cause that's what it feels like is gonna happen. Course, if that means he fights better, I won't complain. He waited, considering. A smirk grew and his teeth glinted in the half-light. In fact, think I'll go test that theory right now. Grimmjow-san. I'm leaving all this here. If I don't come back, send it with Neliel next time she visits. I really don't think. Oh, and never give me any of that liquid black shit again. Not even waiting until he was outside to use Sonido, he followed the trail of that extraordinary spiritual power to its source. Now the sun was sinking towards the horizon, shades of burning orange and yellow seeping to pick out the water and glint off glass and metal in flashes of gold. Grimmjow found Kurosaki Ichigo with 3 others on a hill at the other end of the town. It looked like a graveyard, family names etched into rows of gray stone monuments. One of the so-called humans stank of Shinigami so strongly that he waited cautiously from a distance, scoping out his prey. He was reckless, but he wasn't an idiot. He knew Kurosaki's father was captain class and had kept even Aizen on his toes. No, the elder Kurosaki was powerful, but not nearly as fun. The 2 little ones were out of the question too, entirely too weak and pitiful to spare a second glance. Kurosaki himself, even from a distance, looked drawn and anxious. He had lost weight and his hair was longer, hanging over tired eyes. His Ryatsu pulsed unsteadily. Grimmjow waited. He could be patient. He was a hunter, after all. He had stalked over the dunes of Hukomundo for who knows how long in human years, maybe hundreds, even thousands in pursuit of his prey. Tracking, locating, taking cover, observing. Waiting, quietly, for the right moment to hunker down solid, leap, lunge, dig teeth into flesh. Goosebumps broke out over his body at the thought of tearing into the Shinigami. He could feel bone and muscle give beneath sharp teeth, hot salty blood running down his chin. He could see eyes wide, filled with horror as they looked into his own. One day, he would hold Kurosaki's still beating heart in his hands and squeeze and watch the light leave those eyes. The thought soothed something ragged and howling inside him. It didn't take long for Kurosaki's family members to go, leaving him alone to contemplate a grave with newly lit incense and fresh flowers. Grimmjow watched them leave as they waved and called goodbye, waiting until their presence disappeared and all he could feel was the charged thrum of energy in the air, a grin cracking his face wide open as he approached the Shinigami from behind, lowering to the ground. He almost felt like bouncing, buoyant energy bubbling under the soles of his feet. No one else had ever gotten him so excited. He was close enough to see spikes of orange gently ruffled by the breeze and tense lines of muscle. This close, he could feel the brat's power swirling inside a body that could barely contain it. The power of a constantly exploding supernova star, melting in on itself over and over again, taking everything with it. The battle between them would be fierce, intense as always. He was almost salivating. Oi! Back turned to him and his hands stuffed deep into pockets, staring at the gravestone. Kurosaki Ichigo didn't move an inch. The Arrancar frowned. Brief disappointment evaporated into fury. Are you fucking kidding me? Oi, Kurosaki, he snapped, touching down close behind the other man. Then the smell hit him, a devastatingly human smell, warm and spicy, making his nostrils flare. Grimmjow stepped back, reeling, head full of a scent that had never seemed so overwhelming before. Sweat and something soapy on the surface, something deep and earthy underneath, like musk and gold mixed with fresh black loam, penetrating all his senses. Fuck, even Kurosaki's smell had the nerve to be annoying and invasive, like it had decided to go spelunking down his spine and taken up residence in the swirling emptiness of his stomach like it belonged there. Then it went and rock climbed up into his skull and filled his sinuses, intoxicating. Suddenly, Grimmjow realized he had never interacted with the Shinigami while he was in his human body before. Shit. A single punch could end him while he was in this useless, squishy form. What do you want? The bastard wasn't even looking him in the eye, just turning his face to give a backward glance. His voice was soft and unimpressed. Up close, he looked even worse than before. The fucking nerve. First time they'd met since the end of the war, and this was how it was going down. Unbelievable. Unacceptable. Grimmjow could barely keep from grabbing Kurosaki's throat and squeezing. He settled for grabbing the man's collar and bodily turning him around until their eyes met and he shoved his face close, mouth curled into a snarl, feeling the slow flip of something tight and hot and low in his body in response to their proximity and that goddamn smell. You, Shinigami form, fight, now. For a split second, a look of utter satisfaction flickered across Kurosaki's face, a shrewd gleam in brittle amber eyes. That copper heat lit a corresponding flame in the pit of Grimmjow's carved-out gut that rose up through his chest, his throat, until he could feel sparks crackle across his eyelashes. He was ready to throw himself into that fire again and feel the acid strength of Kurosaki Ichigo's Ryatsu burn him from the inside out. Finally, said the human. His smile could have cut glass. Not here. Bullshit. Who cares where? I care, and I say not here. You don't. You want to do this or not? Ichigo demanded. As pathetic as he felt, he still had a smart ass, sassy mouth, and it was clearly making Grimmjow's blood boil. You look like shit anyway, he hissed, stepping closer and poking a finger into Ichigo's chest. Probably won't give me much of a challenge. Maybe you need a snack and a nap. Get your strength up before you try me. Please, I'm not the one who started this. The fuck you aren't. Who said something about a fight anytime I wanted? And who didn't know when to give up and got jumped by someone on their own side? You piece of... Not here, Ichigo repeated, and hot anger flared in his eyes. His mouth was thin and set stubbornly. I didn't say I wouldn't fight you, Grimmjow. I will. Somewhere else. Follow me. I don't take orders from you, asshole. Ichigo didn't bother listening or protesting. He turned and began to walk downhill, out of the cemetery and towards the river. Yes, it would be fitting. Today would be the best time, and there would be the best place. He could feel the Arrancar's seething fury like heat from a furnace. Ichigo continued walking, hands in pockets, slouched and frowning, knowing Grimmjow would follow eventually. His nerves were alight. Soon enough, he felt tightly controlled Ryatsu creeping behind, predatory. Almost undetectable, he wouldn't have been able to feel it if he hadn't been concentrating. Grimmjow was high up in the air, observing. Ichigo could feel the angry blue eyes on him but didn't change pace. His heart was beating fiercely and his mouth was dry. Down winding gray streets, descending towards the river, turned into melted gold by the ferocious red of the setting sun. In the distance, he saw dark clouds gathering. The day had been hot and humid with a promise of rain to come in the evening. It seemed fitting. He knew exactly where to go, where they could be alone, what to say. He had rehearsed it. The poisonous words spat at his face, then translated into his voice. It would work. It had to work. When they stood in the dark of an underpass far away from others, he stopped. Grimmjow landed a short distance away, and they turned to look at each other. "Well?" Pantera was already drawn and pointed at him. "Get on with it." The river was slow and sluggish, water sloshing at the concrete banks. Heat lay oppressively on his damp skin. He heard a distant, muted rumble, and the air thickened with magnetic charge. Ichigo licked his cracked lips. Carefully, he observed Grimmjow, who was impatiently waiting with pinched brows over piercing eyes and a sneer on his mouth. No obvious aftereffects of Askin's poison, no injuries or new scars, no missing limbs. His hair hadn't fallen out, still styled to leave a few sky-blue strands falling artfully over his forehead. Absently, Ichigo wondered how much time he spent on it. "Kurosaki, get your head in the fucking game." Suddenly Grimmjow was close, too close. Ichigo barely held himself from taking a step backwards, setting his jaw and meeting the Arrancar's gaze squarely with his own. The pinched frown was deeper, piercing eyes had become thunderous, pointed white teeth were exposed. Those eyes raked over him and sharp features slackened in disgust. "Chi, look at you. What a fucking disappointment you've turned out to be, after all." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Keep underestimating me, see what happens. This time I'll even be nice and ask in advance where I should leave a scar for you to remember me by." "Please." Grimmjow took a step back, lowering his sword, dripping with scorn. "I'm a warrior, not an executioner. I've told you before I don't feel like killing you when you're in a shitty state like this. Even in a shitty state like this, I can still take some glorified errand boy." The words fell like stones. Ichigo could feel the temperature drop. Birds stopped tweeting. Even the river held its breath. "What the fuck did you just call me?" It was said in a hiss, low and dangerous. The Arrancar straightened, growing taller, rising, filling the darkening space around them. Pantera rose to point at Ichigo's chest. Grimmjow's Ryatsu became thick, almost solid in its hideous intensity. The fear was overwhelming. Despite himself, Ichigo was shaking. His instincts were screaming at him to take his badge and exit his human body and fight this predator, to protect himself, to survive. He ignored them, and thought hard, looking away. He scratched his cheek idly, heart thumping in his ears. What would Jinju say in this situation? "That's what you are, isn't?" he said, finally. He buried his fists deep in his pockets, nails digging into palms. The careless tilt of his head, his insolent drawl, smirk upon his lips were all carefully studied and channeled from a time that still haunted him at night. First for Aizen, now for Urahara-san. That's what it looks like to me. Grimmjow could have been a statue carved from marble. Not a muscle moved. His face was glowing with luminous rage. Ichigo soldiered on. "A warrior? Gimme a break. Don't think I have much to worry about, really. You're the disappointment, not me. Kurosaki, get out of that body, now." Got pushed around by Aizen, got your arm chopped off, sliced open by your own ally, poisoned, huh? A soft snarl was let out through clenched, pointed teeth. Ichigo smirked. I'll be honest, I'm not too worried about my chances. The golden hour was fading fast. Darkness crept with long fingers to claim them. Ichigo heard a sharp snap echo through air which felt like molasses, followed by another rumble of thunder, much closer than before. He reached deep inside, for the contempt and disgust that drowned him in those nightmares brought it forth to be regurgitated. At least I respected you then. Now look at you. Is this what you've become? Both of Grimmjow's hands came to grip Pantera's hilt, white-knuckled. His lips were stretching wider and wider into a furious, wordless snarl. Gravitational force seemed to warp the air around his tense, motionless body. Muscles were clenched at his neck, another jumping at his temple. Ichigo had never seen him look so angry. Looks like you didn't become a king in the end. He tipped his head back, looked down at Grimmjow with heavy-lidded eyes. Almost. He was so close, he could feel it. More like a peasant than a king. They were walking on a knife edge, sinking into the blade. A frantic voice was whispering at the back of his mind. I almost feel sorry for you. Lightning forked the sky as thunder cracked and shook the earth around them. It started to rain. Melting worlds. Shadows creeping in. A weight against him, solid and heavy. Whose weight? A feeling like he was flying. Voices and words, short, terse, muttered under hushed breaths. Ichigo faded in and out of consciousness, but finally took refuge in the darkness as he breathed in the familiar, musty smell of the Urahara shoten. A deep voice was chanting over him. The light was low and steady, staining the inside of his eyelids a dark orange. Ichigo inhaled sharply, eyes closed, then gasped as pain clawed at his chest. Firm, strong hands held down his shoulders. Kurosaki Dono, Tessai rumbled. I'm glad to see you're awake. Please refrain from tearing your stitches. I would prefer not to open your ribcage again. He sagged. He refused to open his eyes because he could feel Tessai's breath on his face and knew the other man would be looming over him, mere inches away, and he couldn't handle that right now. It hurt to breathe. Open my ribcage, his voice came out a wheeze. Indeed, unfortunately, since Orihime-chan is no longer resident in Karakura and it would have taken too long to fetch her, it was necessary to use advanced Kaido to cut through your skin, muscle and bone and expose the inner fleshy workings of the heart so we could. Please, Ichigo's voice was strangled. Stop. Ah, he's rejoined the world of the living. A chirpy voice had him biting back a groan of impatience. Of course, this is how it would all turn out. What had he been in his previous life? A serial child killer? A murderous maniac? A lawyer? He would never be able to escape. Yet another sword in his chest, a hole through his heart, a literal waking nightmare, and here he was again. This was just getting ridiculous. Maybe it was Ifwatch's influence, this constant punishment. He was surely sitting up there, preserved like an insect in amber, as the new Soul King, laughing down at him. Kurosaki-san, it's been a long time. What a shame this meeting had to be under such sad circumstances. Ichigo forced himself to breathe, in and out, several times, before wrenching his eyes open and forcing himself to sit. Tessai muttered objections, moving out the way, and the entirety of his upper body screamed at him, but Ichigo ignored them both and rubbed the bandages wrapped around his chest, silent and brooding, eyes downcast. His labored breathing punctuated the weighty silence that hung on them. They were in a large, traditional-style room, with little else but a wooden table with a thick blanket attached and several cushions scattered around it. Lamps provided soft, diffused warm light, and a tall, pale ceramic container with a flared opening had been left on the table, along with 2 shallow dishes. He could smell the stink of spilled sake from where he was sitting, felt the buzz of magic working inside and around him. He ached, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. Nothing he hadn't handled before, over and over again. But this time, he'd been so sure. All of a sudden bared white teeth and enraged blue eyes loomed large in his vision, and he shuddered despite himself. Something in his chest twinged. "Where's Grimmjow?" he asked, barely stopped his voice from cracking. A bitter taste coated his tongue. He had to leave in a rush. Unfortunately, Urahara sat next to his assistant, and they exchanged a look. The fan was up and over the face. "He sends his zoo apologies." "Apologies? And he's okay?" Ichigo recalled what he'd said and flinched. The next time they met, well, he'd be dead for sure. But then, why wasn't he dead now? Of course, he wasn't the one impaled by a sword. But how are you feeling? Tessai worked magnificently to save you, as always. It's a shame you weren't conscious to see it. "I'm fine," Ichigo said, holding back a flinch as he shifted in place. "Good to go." "Absolutely not," the Kaido master trumpeted. "Your heart was pierced clean through. Things may have been physically repaired, but the impact of the injury still exists, and I must insist on bed rest for the patient." Ichigo stared at him, aghast. "See, seriously? You're telling me this now? Where was this advice 3 years ago?" "Kurosaki-san, it seems like you've forgotten we're not at war anymore," Urahara said cheerfully. "These days you don't have to rush here and there from world to world, even after you've been stabbed right through the heart in your human body." The weight he put on the last 2 words didn't go unnoticed. Ichigo's eyes darkened, and he tore his gaze away from both of them. "Not like it's worst thing that's happened to me here. No need to tell anyone." "Too late for that, unfortunately." "Huh?" He whipped his head round to look at Urahara. "What do you mean?" "This isn't something I'd normally do." The shopkeeper's voice was unusually serious, "but circumstances are a little different this time round." "What do you mean? Too late?" he asked urgently. Surely he couldn't mean. The paper door, which Ichigo just noticed, had a large human-shaped hole ripped through it, whispered open. The shadowed figure that stood at the threshold looked at him with unreadable eyes. He cursed softly. "Glad to see you too, son. Well done on still being alive. I know it's something you've had a problem with in the past." Kurosaki Ichigo stepped inside, took a look at the men next to Ichigo. "I guess you made it this time because of these two." He bowed. "Many thanks for repairing my idiot offspring. Give me a moment alone with him, would you? Seems like some precious family bonding time is overdue." "It absolutely is not," Ichigo protested. "I'm fine." "Ichigo." The dead chill of his father's tone decapitated his voice as Isshin sat down and fixed him with a stare, crossing his arms, then sighing and looking around. They were alone now, in the half-lit room where empty corners gathered long shadows. "Looks like the only time we get to talk properly is when you've just had a near-death experience or two. Or full-death experience, for that matter. It's starting to be a problem. Rich, coming from the actual dead guy. That's neither here nor there." His hands clenched. "You of all people don't get to lecture me about this. I'm just going to say it. Your mother would not have wanted you to do what you tried to do," Isshin said quietly. "Let's not make this date any sadder than it already is." The words were a punch to the gut. Ichigo was speechless. His head hung. Forget that he'd just been impaled by a sword. In the end, it looked like his dad was going to be the one that finished him off, bringing out the big guns right from the start. "That's not, you don't. There's only so long I can stand aside and watch you self-destruct. I've seen you retreat and isolate yourself before without saying a word. But this?" Isshin made a small, unhappy sound. "Kisuke filled me in on the basics and I figured the rest out myself. I have to say, I didn't expect anything this drastic." A long, portentous pause. "I haven't told your sisters. I don't know if they should know." "No," Ichigo said quickly, looking up. His heart wriggled. No, his sisters should never find out. The thought crawled down his throat and made him feel sick. "I told them you got caught up in some trouble as usual," said Isshin. "Plus, they're used to you disappearing by now anyway." Ichigo ground his teeth, seething on the inside. He wondered how everything could have gone so spectacularly wrong. What the hell had Grimmjow been playing at, bringing him here? Why had Urahara called his father like Ichigo was some snot-nosed kid that had gotten teased at a sleepover and not a full-grown soldier that had lived through 2 wars in 3 different worlds? Sorry. Ichigo glanced at his father, frowning. The apology cracked a chink in his armor. I shouldn't have said that, Isshin continued. His features and his voice were strained. It's not your fault you keep secrets. Got that from your old man, eh? The silence between them stretched taut. Ichigo opened and shut his mouth, then decided on, I don't know how to live like this. Like the inside of his body hadn't been lined with lead and stone, numbing him to everything. So you decide to die? What can I even do here that's useful anyway? At least as a Shinigami I can help people. It would have been for the best. That's not for you to decide. You're not even legally an adult yet, Ichigo. You've barely started to live. So you didn't get into medical school. So what? I can't begin to tell you how miserable the medical profession is as a whole. Full of narcissists and psychopaths. Don't forget emotionally stunted man-children. A bark of laughter. In that case, you'd be a perfect fit. Ichigo glared, barely holding back from throwing himself down on the futon. He knew his body would hate him for it, and his mind already hated him enough. The double whammy would knock him out at this point. But considering his current company, it wasn't an unattractive idea. Sorry, Isshin held his hands up. I know. Not the time. It's never the time for your bullshit. That means it's always the time. Ichigo's stony face deflated his father's cheerful smile and thumbs up. No, okay, I'm being serious, I mean it. Call me when that happens. He started to lay down, slowly and carefully. Actually, don't. Pain forked up and out through his trunk, too much for him to even try thinking about sleeping. He had forgotten how painful injuries in this body could be. Inao had spoiled them over the years. Her kind and compassionate nature and her godlike powers of reality rejection always providing instant healing and protection. Thoughts of Inao naturally led to thoughts of Chad, Ishida, Tatsuki, Keigo, and Mizuhiro. They texted from time to time, called even less. At first, Keigo had kept their group chat alive by spamming them with endless memes and constant updates about his journey of cycling around Japan to find the best ramen in the country. As soon as he'd fallen into an apprenticeship to actually learn how to make the stuff, he sent frequent photos of his latest trials and errors. Inao responded with the pastries she was learning to make at culinary school. Chad often contributed a thumbs up while the others offered rare insights into all-nighters, studies, lessons, travels. Over the weeks and months, updates dwindled from a cheerful torrent to slow, apologetic drips. People were busy. Everybody was busy, living their lives, or their unlives. Everybody except Ichigo. His father was still there, sitting beside him. Neither spoke. Ichigo flung an arm over his eyes, grunting at the strain it sent down one side. How long would he have to stay here? What would he say when he got back home and saw his sisters' faces? The thought made his stomach churn. I don't blame you, Ichigo, murmured Isshin finally. And trust me, I don't hate you. How can I hate a man so much like the woman I love? A pause. A sigh. Never said anything about you hating me. Well, I just wanted to clarify ahead of time. The arm slid away and Ichigo squinted suspiciously at his father. Clarify. Ichigo, my boy, you'll learn that opportunities don't always knock. Sometimes they whisper. And sometimes they call you up in the middle of dinner and shout abuse at you because your darling son missed his 3rd shift in a row. Pets were not fed or medicated correctly. And now there is explosive dog diarrhea painting the floor, walls and part of the ceiling in a lovely monochrome mural in Takahashi-san's family home down the street. Ichigo's mouth fell open. Shit. Literally. A fine figure of a woman, that Ikimi-san is. Isshin stroked the stubble on his chin thoughtfully. And she has a high opinion of you, I can tell. An interesting way of expressing it. True, but it's obvious she thinks you're a good kid. Despite all the imaginative names she called you, and me. Is that what you're clarifying? That I fucked up? He'd fucked up? Ichigo curled into a fetal position and held his head in his hands, gritting his teeth. HN? Oh, no, not at all. Isshin had the gall to look amused, if anything. No, after the thorough verbal desecration of your old man's family line. She explained to me that you two discussed possible employment in the big Japanese apple quite a while ago, but the offer is still open. Oh, that. His words were muffled. He felt like a child. Yes, indeed, that. I wouldn't dismiss it, Ichigo. It sounds like a good chance to spread your wings, expand your horizons, be useful, as you say. Pass. I thought it might come to this. Isshin sighed, crossing his arms, then drew in a deep breath. In that case, unfortunately, you leave me no choice. Ichigo raised his head. His eyes narrowed, sensing danger. Kurosaki Ichigo, my son, apple of my eye, bane of my life, flame-haired firstborn and luscious fruit of my loins. Dad. I am hereby immediately and irrevocably, by my authority as your father, kicking you out. A pin drop would have been deafening in the ensuing silence. You're what now? Isshin would not wilt under the blazing eyes his son directed at him. You heard me the first time. And exactly where the hell am I gonna go? It dawned on him slowly. Wait, don't tell me you seriously decided this without even asking me. You, Kurosaki Isshin drew himself up and pointed a commanding finger at his son, are going to move out. Dad, I swear. Get a job. If this is a joke. And stop hanging out with so many dead people. Stream after stream of intense, crackling energy buffeted the sands. The impact evaporated stone and rock, and left wide, curved craters of glass, steaming and glistening in the somber light of the moon. The lower beings of Hukomundo, hollow insects and lizards, burrowed and tunneled and took flight in squealing fear, fleeing from the furious presence that haunted the skies. A blue-eyed berserker tore through the desert, releasing through black, clawed hands the tidal waves of rage and shock that battered him from the inside. Kicking down trees wasn't enough. He needed to obliterate. Banished? Grimmjow snarled it out. His whole body was tightly drawn, hanging by a thread. Blue sparks flew from his fingertips. A cirro arced and spread, demolishing a line of bare, rocky hills dotted with trees. Banished from the fucking human world? As fucking if. He flung a series of ballasts, small and sharp like needles. Sand fizzled where the blows landed and flamed into chunks of smoky glass. That motherfucking asshole. That Kurosaki. And then those cunts. Explosion after explosion after explosion warped the atmosphere around him, reality groaning and rippling against its will in the aftermath. Blue light streaked in the sky, turning midnight into daylight's haphazard mimic. Grimmjow stood in the air, staring down at the smoking craters and hills of crumbled rock, scoring the landscape as far as the eye could see, panting and pacing. Swaths of ash-colored glass glinted among the dunes, elegant and sculptural against the chaotic destruction. He dimly recalled releasing a Gran Rey Cirro into the ground, a cavernous hole opening up and caving in, revealing the Minos forest below. Masked creatures so weak they didn't even bother showing up on his radar retreated from his presence in a mass exodus. Even the wave of fear and panic from the hordes of Jillian was barely a tickle at the back of his throat. Grimmjow. A lance was pointed at his neck. He came to a grinding halt. Neliel stood before him, face hard, hazel eyes glinting. Her Ryatsu was a threatening cloak, thwarting his, but not overpowering it. I'm going to the site, she said, clearly and firmly. No tone of rebuke in her voice, but his shoulders stayed tense all the same. Stay away from that area. I need to install the sensors Keisuke-san gave us. You'll just be in the way. The kind of mood you're in went unsaid. She was carrying them in a bag slung at her hip. Metal gleamed and lights blinked. At the sight, he had an idea. I'll do it, he said. One hand dropped to his side while the other reached out to her, no longer in his release form. The frenzied boil inside him dipped to a simmer, but static energy still sizzled in his hair. "Absolutely not," she said, frowning sternly. The lance disintegrated and she crossed her arms, legs wide. "I already made the mistake of letting you go to the Shoten instead of going myself. Then look what happened. This time, Harable asks me to do something, I'll do it. Chi, don't be a fucking idiot. I know the terrain better than anyone. You can't smell or sense or track even 1% of what I can. And anyway, I was the only one who got shown how to use them. Doesn't matter. He drew up some maps to help me put these things where they need to go, with instructions on how to use them. That's what I'll do, then I'll come back." Her expression soured. "I won't. Oh, I don't know. Try and kill an ally who helped us win a war against an invading force and upset a very delicate diplomatic situation that's only been achieved through endless bureaucratic bullshit." She cut herself off with a sudden indrawn breath, and Grimmjow raised an eyebrow at hearing little Miss Prim and proper Neliel do grovel shank curse. He stuck a finger in his ear and scratched, shrugging. "Sounds boring? Go on ahead without me, then. Do you even care about what you've done?" Neliel's quiet rage raised the eyebrow higher. Oh, so she was actually pissed off. Made sense. She basically attached herself to Kurosaki like some sort of parasite whenever she saw him. She'd be upset he'd had a little hole poked through him. She sighed when he remained silent. "Grimmjow, we have a chance to decide our own future here. Don't you see what's at stake? We can protect our home, have a say in what happens, how we develop. We're no longer animals, hunting and eating each other. We can think and plan and create something new. We can take what we've been given, this intellect, this reason, this power, and we can finally use it for ourselves, not as tools or resources for anyone else. We can be independent. This is what Harable wants. What I want. Don't you want it too?" "I don't give a fuck," he said after a while, looking her square in the eye. "We're already independent. I'm a hollow. You're a hollow. Reason, intellect, all that bullshit. That's not what hollows do. We fight Shinigami, Quincy, each other. That's it. That's what we do." Neliel didn't answer, just regarded him coolly. His arm remained outstretched, until she gently but firmly pushed it away. "I'll do this myself. You continue having your little temper tantrum out here, then deal with the consequences of your own actions like everyone else." Her head cocked. "Thought you would have known better after I heard you lost that arm, but I guess some people never learn." She disappeared in a glimmer, and he almost lunged after her, frothing the mouth. Temper tantrum? Consequences of his own actions? How fucking dare she? "This is all fucking bullshit," he roared after her. His hands flexed, longing to form some sort of explosive device he could hurl at her, but he had no doubt she'd use her Ciro-Double and blast it right back at him. If he tried to fight, he knew she'd square up if she had to, but the sting of Kurosaki's blood on his sword still hummed under his skin, vibrated in his muscles, and licked the nerves up his spine into the back of his skull too intensely to think about fighting anyone else. There was too much, just too much of everything whipped up into a fever, writhing inside his body until he couldn't think straight. And all that energy needed somewhere to go. Kurosaki Ichigo had flipped a switch in him, like he always did, everything from his cocky smile to the dark fire in his eyes, setting off a chain of chemical reactions that invariably resulted in Grimmjow's headiest animal instincts charging to the forefront. Intellect and reason be damned, Kurosaki roused up that feeling of being alive, when he was so thoroughly dead. It surged up inside, raw, visceral, in a tidal wave that swallowed him whole. Nervous system still sizzling, Grimmjow landed softly onto the wrecked sands and threw himself down under the curving arc of silvery, smoky glass, taking deep breaths. He pulled something out from his jacket. The rusty scent of barely dried blood hit his nostrils and they flared sharply. The cloth twisted in his hand, staining his fingers red. He'd wiped his sword with the rag and stuffed it into a pocket as Neliel Frog marched him through the garganta she opened in the human world. Her mouth was stretched in a thin line, and she refused to speak to him, but the pressure of her fingers digging into his upper arm had threatened to pierce his hiro even after he reinforced it. The arrival at Los Noches, being dragged into a small room where Harable waited for him, pacing back and forth in her resurrection form, barely registered. Words like invasion, violation, aggression were thrown at him while he stood and stared, slouching against a wall, a barrier of boredom carefully constructed to conceal the fire still screeching in his blood. Apparently, because he attacked Kurosaki Ichigo in his human body, this involved a whole new set of complications. As he was technically not a Shinigami when you attacked him, they haven't been informed. Harable's face was tightly drawn, her teeth gritted as she spoke to him. Otherwise, I have no doubt they'd be here in their hordes, demanding some sort of chastisement. Let them come, he'd said, pushing off the wall and breaking into a mad smile. I'll take 'em on, all of them. Idiot. She slammed a fist into the wall beside him, and he jerked away in surprise. The impact shook the room, and he heard things fall and shatter in the distance. Do you know how hard Neliel and I have worked to get us here? Harable whispered. It made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Do you know how long it's taken us to argue our case as intelligent, rational beings capable of governing ourselves? Not tormented wild animals like we used to be, scattered and powerless, but people worthy of respect and consideration. And now you go and do this and almost ruin everything. Hands clenched at her sides, her sleek form approached him slowly with liquid, deadly grace until she was mere inches away, and he was reminded that he wasn't the only apex predator in the room. Her wrathful green eyes fixed him in place. I know you are more than the animal you pretend to be, Grimmjow, but you refuse to move on from the old ways that we have chosen to leave behind. We will give you a choice. You can either evolve with us, or you can leave and return to the desert. Either way, we have decided what your punishment will be. Punishment? He repeated in disbelief. Are you fucking kidding me? I saved his ass. After you ran him through with your sword. Little shit was asking for it. Grimmjow Jaegerjaquez. Her voice rang with imperious finality. As punishment for your transgression, it has been decided that you will be banished from entering the human world, with or without an escort, effective immediately. You. She cut across him. Should you violate this, Urahara Kisuk, Shihuen Yoruichi, Tessai Tsukubishi, and Kurosaki Ichigo of Karakura Town have our full permission to incarcerate or execute you as they see fit. This punishment will remain in effect until you've proven that you can behave in a sane, rational way that befits creatures of our station. Harable held his livid gaze. She unleashed her Ryatsu, and Neliel, who'd been standing behind all this time, joined her. Their combined power enveloped him, and it felt like being inside a too small box lined with spikes. Sweat broke out on his forehead and down the back of his neck. His skeleton creaked under the pressure, but he refused to let it show. If he decided to challenge them both, he knew it would annihilate them all. They'd erupt Los Noches straight into the sky, everything crashing and burning and crumbling to pieces. Grimmjow thought of his room, his work unfinished. He'll die anyway, a voice whispered in the back of his mind, even as the rest of him howled. He's a human. 7 years, 70 years, what does it matter? Stupid Shinigami'll bite the dust, and then he'll go to Soul Society. You're not banned from there. Yet, so. Grimmjow was impressed at how calmly he'd accepted it all. He hadn't even started throwing explosives until he left the room, and then he'd just ridden that wave of anger and violence all the way here, out into the desert, where he came from and where he belonged. Where he stayed, sitting under translucent sepia-colored glass that shielded him from the crooked, knowing smile of the moon. The smell of blood was full and rich in his nose. Grimmjow brought the rag up to eye level and inspected smears of amber that should have been scarlet, warped by the strange light that came through the glass that sheltered him. It almost looked like, if Neliel, Harable, or any other of the screeching idiots that haunted Los Noches were curious about what he brought back to the castle after that, They kept it to themselves. Clearly, they thought giving him the silent treatment was some sort of punishment, and he was more than happy to let them labor under that particular illusion. In fact, if this was what it took for them to leave him alone, he would have stabbed Kurosaki Ichigo without a second thought as soon as the fucker had recovered after his bout with Earthwatch. I almost feel sorry for you. The words ran through his mind on a loop, over and over again. With each echo came a fresh surge of hatred and rage, feelings that could only be released when he was alone in his sanctuary and he had the freedom to express them in violent slashes of claws and rivulets of ink. Paper didn't talk back to him. Paper didn't get hurt. Paper didn't protest when it was cleaved open, torn to shreds and desecrated and scrawled over, burned and thrown against walls. He could do whatever the fuck he liked, and no one could do or say shit about it. With the words came other sensations. He remembered it all so clearly, every sight, sound and smell etched into his bones. It had only taken a split second for them to sink in. His sword had already been drawn and pointed at Kurosaki's chest, and before he'd even been conscious of it, Pantera was slicing through yielding flesh in the same amount of time it took for lightning to illuminate that familiar, hateful face. Kurosaki had made a short, strange gurgling noise that would have been funny in any other situation before gasping quietly and falling silent, the look on his face melting from shock into a strange grimace of relief. Grimmjow could still feel the unexpected softness of that human body as it sagged against him. Kurosaki's smell, still resident up his nose and behind his eyes, deep and dark and invasive. Fine, soft orange hair brushing his jaw, blood running onto his hands, warmth seeping from his skin into Grimmjow's cold iron hide as he transported them from that fucking riverbank to the Shoten in a sudden torrential downpour of rain, his mind a screaming blank. He had been caught between numbness and excitement. The thought of cutting into Kurosaki Ichigo's flesh and finally ending his miserable existence had been a dream since he'd first clapped eyes on the scrawny brat. The sight of Kurosaki, thrashed and beaten raw, yet refusing to bow down, did something to Grimmjow he couldn't quite explain, and the feeling of that hot sticky blood gushing straight from the heart and staining his hands had his toes curling and his spine stretching eagerly towards a destination he didn't know how to name. But not like this. Not like some floppy rag doll, fragile and pathetic. Kurosaki was better than that. Grimmjow was better than that. It shouldn't end this way, and he would make sure it wouldn't. He had torn through that useless paper door into the room Urahara led him to before as easily as his sword had impaled Kurosaki. A voice in the back of Grimmjow's mind reminded him not to take it out as awkward as it was to maneuver the limp Shinigami with a sword sticking out his back. Pantera was probably the only thing stopping him from bleeding out instantly and dying on all of them there and then. As he arrived, one hand was on her hilt, the other wrapped around Kurosaki's lithe frame to keep him upright. His head was lolling on Grimmjow's shoulder, nose buried in the crook of Grimmjow's neck and arms hanging bonelessly by his sides. Tessai and Urahara had taken one look and both immediately understood the situation, abandoning their sake. Urahara sent him a shadowy, sidelong glance before relaying a message to Neliel through some device he'd given her, while Tessai began to recite incantations and prepared a surface to tend to the Shinigami's mortal wound. Grimmjow gripped Pantera's hilt and slid her blade out of Kurosaki's breastbone with a sickening squelch, handing him over to Tessai just before Neliel appeared, agitated and distraught. No doubt she and Hannibal would be working twice, thrice, 4 times harder to make up for his inadequacies in diplomacy. Grimmjow was surprised that no Shinigami had appeared in Hukomundo, demanding retribution yet. But then he remembered the carnage Earthwatch and his ridiculously overpowered army had unleashed on Soul Society and the Goti 13 and realized there'd be no way those short-sighted idiots would waste an extra soul on bringing a rogue Arrancar to heal when they could just manipulate the dumbfuck leftover Arrancar into doing it for them. She had given him a choice: the castle or the desert. In true Grimmjow fashion, he had chosen both. Hannibal said nothing as he continued his mapping of Hukomundo, Updating schematics and sketches, he named the area he'd wreaked havoc upon fuck around and find out territory, but no one else seemed to appreciate the irony. Recording images with the camera and coming back to hole himself away in his wing of old Los Noches, filling empty rooms with his observations and explorations. The blood he'd wiped from his sword gave him an idea which he expanded upon. But it was difficult to keep drawing it from himself. So many an unfortunate hollow that crossed his path found itself hunted and harvested, though not to the point of death, and so he lugged back containers of their blood, free to come and go undisturbed. It seemed Harable had instructed her Fraxian that he was persona non grata, not to be addressed or acknowledged in any way. He relished the looks on their faces as he strolled past them with his mysterious halls, covered in blood of various colors. They were too dedicated to Harable to disobey her, but too furious at Grimmjow for flouting her orders to ignore him completely. And he took great joy in answering the evil glares they directed at him while skulking in corners with smug expressions that often veered into maniacal. His cackling laugh rang through those stark white hallways as he watched them seethe silently, enjoying his newfound freedom. He gradually relaxed into exile. Maybe it was for the best that he was banished. Really, it was all working out swimmingly. Aizen was dead, the Quincy's were gone, and Kurosaki was still alive. If he died and turned into a Shinigami, Grimmjow would still gut him and bathe in his blood. If he died and turned into a hollow, even better. Grimmjow would devour him whole and feel that power glittering within him, part of his skin, bones, muscles, for the rest of his existence. There was no rush. The Shinigami might technically be alive right now, but if there was only ever one truth in the world, it was that everything that lived had to die, and Grimmjow could wait. He was a predator, a hunter, at the top of the food chain. He would take his time, shape and sculpt and polish the burning hatred in his heart into a finely tuned weapon that not even Kurosaki Ichigo, with his weird fucking hybrid powers and colossal bordering on ridiculous spiritual power, would be able to defy. One day, Grimmjow would face his nemesis while they were both at full strength, at their peak, power radiating like a tsunami from their unbroken bodies. They'd spin and fly and dance on the battlefield again, blade against blade, rippling through space and time until finally he'd see the Shinigami kneeling before him, battered and bruised, and Grimmjow would rip through the cage Kurosaki Ichigo's heart was trapped inside and free it for himself.